Mark Lamont, who you'll recall, he was fired from where?
CNN.
CNN, because of things he had said about the Israeli.
He's basically been pro-Palestine for a while, and he's also a professor, if I'm not mistaken. But he was fired as a CNN contributor, and it seems like he has a new home at Al Jazeera English, and he was doing this interview with the former Israeli foreign minister, and Danny Ayalon is his name, and the line of questioning here and what he gets him to really admit, or at the end, I just think is incredibly instructive.
And I want to just point out that the current government of Israel is the most right-wing, both as a function of like ethno-nationalism and religious fundamentalism that Israel has ever had. So, what takes some coaxing of former Israeli government officials. Now, many of these current government Israeli government officials are like 2 steps out from it, and you don't need to coax them. That's their. It's not a bug. It's a feature.
We played on Friday, I believe, opened the show with Naftali Bennett, former Israeli prime minister, who was the PM in the brief period that Bibi was out of power. Is basically getting outraged over a British media presenter or anchor asking him about Palestinian children. Just getting really, really upset, saying, "You're asking me about Palestinian civilians? How dare you?" Yeah. And that's kind of just the broad sentiment that has now taken over in this in Israel, I would say, right now. Although Haaretz, other 972 magazine, other left-wing publications within Israel are doing a great job of trying to at least beat back some of the insane desire for blood that we're seeing, but still not enough, because of people like this are more representative of how those in power feel.
I mean, I think 2 things.
Sorry, we're going to play this clip.
He said that the humanitarian situation, quote, will only deteriorate exponentially, and that crucial life-saving supplies, including fuel, food, and water, must be allowed into Gaza. So the UN is saying you must do this. You are saying you're not going to do this. How do you?
No, we're not saying that.
He's saying do it. He's saying doing it immediately. What I'm saying is what you're doing.
No.
He's saying doing it immediately.
I got you. I'll tell you exactly what we're saying. I'm saying we will do everything for the Gazan people. Once and now, we demand immediate surrender, unconditional surrender of Hamas. If Hamas people come out with their hands up and clear their weapons, believe me, everything will be restored to Gaza. It is Hamas in Hamas hands.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you for clarifying that, sir. I think we're actually on the same page here. You're saying that once Hamas leaves, you'll grant the Gazan people food, shelter, fuel, electricity, hospitals, schooling. And if they don't, and if Hamas doesn't leave, then they'll continue to starve and die in hospitals. You are defining for the international community right now collective punishment. You're saying until Hamas acts differently, the 2 million people in Gaza are going to be treated this way. And once Hamas acts differently, these 2 million people in Gaza will be treated better. That is exactly what collective punishment is. You're holding them accountable for the actions of others. That is the definition, the textbook definition of collective punishment, sir. Now you may accept that that's what you want to do, but this is absolutely a contravention of international law.
Well, I'll tell you exactly. No, had we pushed them into the wall, we're not pushing them to the wall. We want to open a humanitarian corridor so they can leave. But if Hamas,
so that who can leave? Citizens? You're saying civilians can leave, but only through the Rafah border, correct?
At this point, yes.
So they can't come.
Where else?
Your country. They can come into Israel.
I'm telling you one more thing I want to say.
I want you to address that point. Don't just smile, sir, respectfully. You're saying you're making a corridor. They can go to Egypt. You're bombing them. You say you want to save them, but they can't come in.
First of all, I'm not smiling. I'm crying in my heart.
Yeah.
I'm horrified by the framing of this. He's got a monitor behind him, and he's in front of the monitor, and he's not in front of the air conditioning unit that's on the left.
Yeah.
Come on.
But Well, first off, they've been bombing the Rafah passageway. I mean,
Although
were
they're
doing
blaming
the
it on
first-
Hamas now.
I mean, there's there have been
the evacuation.
there is not that the
Just double check that.
I've
yeah.
seen a video of one explosion that has been broken down. That there is skepticism as to whether that has been, and I wouldn't necessarily put it beyond Hamas to make that exit also difficult. I mean, it wouldn't be beyond them. But the idea that it is ludicrous that Israel would take in these refugees versus Egypt. I mean, just contemplate that for a moment. How sincerely do they actually want to protect these the people living in Gaza? And I would imagine it would be a massive undertaking that Israel could barely sustain in taking in these refugees, which is what people should understand. Egypt has less resources than Israel does, far less stability, and the idea of bringing in 1 million refugees and somehow getting the capacity to through the Negev desert to sustain these people, it's inconceivable, and it's just as inconceivable. So.
I mean, it's why are you forcing them to evacuate in the first place? Like, I understand that we now accepted that that Israel needs to retaliate in this way, and there's indiscriminate bombing in this highly concentrated area of the world. It's 145-ish square miles. It's the size of Detroit. 600,000 people live in Detroit. Over 2 million people in Gaza. I mean, we shouldn't accept that premise on its face, because they're setting up a narrative where, well, we told them to leave so we could seize their land. And a lot of people who live in Gaza are saying we will die in our homes because we know if we leave, we will never see our homes again.
They got chances here rather than the Sinai Desert.
I just don't even like, exactly. And I don't, you have to push back on that as well, because this is not the Israeli government being magnanimous. This is them saying, get out of the way because we're bombing this regardless. And they will eventually, it appears, via ground invasion, attempt to seize territory there. I mean, like, I wanted to read a little bit at one point, this Haaretz op-ed. But I mean, just to respond to something that guy said there, this expulsion is mass collective punishment that provides an omen of what's to come. Israel is saying that the northern Gaza Strip has to be cleared of Hamas, and then it will move further south. 2 million people, or those of them who are left alive, will then be ordered to flee back to the north to cleanse the south. This mission will be accomplished. The Israeli Defense Forces will make note of the masses of fatalities that it caused and claim that most of them were from Hamas. Every teenager will be called a Hamas member. More than 600 Palestinian children have already been killed as of Saturday afternoon prior to any ground invasion. They were not Hamas. Israel will be victorious. Gaza will be leveled. I mean, this is a very pessimistic, appropriately so, opinion piece from Gideon Levy and Haaretz. But that's the point, is they will claim that these are Hamas connections regardless of the situation. Now the goal is to seize this territory as a way to collectively punish, in addition to the bombing campaign and the killing of civilians, this population in Gaza, which has always been, in the end, the desire of the hardliners in the Israeli government, and now they have an excuse to do it.
This is the fun part?
Yeah.
Fun part of the show.
Fun
Well,
part
I mean,
of the
look, we still have another hour and 10 minutes.
Exactly.
We're good.
Yeah,
We're good.
It keeps going.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to what your guest Omar Shakir was saying. This is the gerrymander, right? They're not going to let any kind of refugee into Israel, because that would be the dilution of that.
And certainly not into the West Bank, because everything they have done over the course of the past really 25, 30 years in terms of bringing in particularly a lot of emigres from the former Soviet Union. And essentially, doing some type of homesteading act to put them into the West Bank. I mean, that's what.
And of course, what we're seeing now is with the world's attention on Gaza, we're seeing growing amounts of incidents from those settlers picking off people in the West Bank. I think 50 are dead since the beginning of this conflict. And it's, as soon as you turn your attention away from that, these what have been called pogroms in the West Bank will continue. I
think, too, we will hear, and we're working on a guest for sometime this week to talk about the there's a lot of animosity towards Netanyahu amongst the Israeli population. It isn't necessarily because they don't want to invade Gaza, but rather the failure to keep them safe. I mean,
which is in huge contrast to what happened in this country after 9/11, right? There was a rally around the flag effect, and even though the same intelligence failures were pretty obviously present in the United States, that didn't matter. People, I believe Bush at the beginning of the post 9/11 period had 90% approval.
Yeah, it's a contrast.
It is a complete contrast.
The context is different too, because in Israel, part of the reason why there were no military personnel down or sufficient numbers in that area was because they were sent up to the West Bank to essentially midwife, for lack of a better term, some of those pogroms. The building of a Sukkot, which is a way you celebrate Sukkah, a holiday almost like a Thanksgiving holiday, if you will, and about the harvest in Hawara. I may be pronouncing that wrong, and so there's that resentment, but also, one of the fundamental aspects that you hear in terms of arguments, in terms of justifying Israel, is the need for Jews to have a place in the world where they could feel safe in the wake of the Holocaust. And even that project, because I'm one who I think things could have changed. There was a moment, I feel like Israel is at a crossroads, and that it may have ended with Rabin's assassination. But the project of all the projects involved in the establishment of Israel, the security one does not seem to be working. I mean, this is this is the fundamental sort of was the organizing principle of Israel, was a secure place for Jews. And so the failure of Netanyahu, and we're talking now, and really, if anybody inherited the legacy of Ariel Sharon, it was Netanyahu. The failure of this ideology over the course of the past 2 to 3 decades in terms of securing Israeli security, that is something that was fundamentally different from the United States. Is that embedded in the entire rationalization and the excuse making, if you will, or just the sort of legitimacy, whatever your perspective is, of Israel, is this notion of security. And that project, I think it's very hard to argue, has not fundamentally failed. Because it is, what is clear at this point is, regardless of how much you suppress these people, and just the entire reason of the demography that our guest was talking about in the evacuation of Gaza, that number, you had 8,000 settlers, you have 1.4 million probably at the time, 5 at the time of the sort of unilateral disengagement from Gaza, as opposed to the keeping it as a prison. That demographic dynamic is playing out in the country writ large now, and it's really just a matter of time. And I think the one thing that really this attack showed the Israelis is that this project, this approach, has been a failure and will be a failure, because again, they can eliminate Hamas maybe 2/3 of it, or half of it, or they can decapitate most of its leadership. But the resent that will be generated, the pain and destruction they're going to create, is essentially like a petri dish for their next generation of enemies.
Unless they genocide, unless they do like a more full-scale genocide, and they really, really kill a lot of people.
Well, I mean, it's just not. They're just not. I mean,
but that's
short of a nuclear weapon.
That's underneath. That's the undergirding impulse underneath all of this. I mean, they're saying a lot of Palestinian advocates are saying this is genocidal rhetoric, and I don't think that is hyperbolic in any way. I mean, the only thing that's keeping them from, I would say, going full bore is the fact that right now, at least Biden and some members of the United States government are starting to preach some sort of restraint. And you're seeing that on the international stage at the very least.
Well,
that's the one like kind of sliver of hope that I have. And great Jewish groups doing wonderful work like If Not Now and Jewish Voices for Peace rallying in front of the White House today.
There's actually a rally there right now. We have somebody over there.
Good, yeah.
What I would say is, you look at the internal politics of Israel. We have seen over the last decade large and growing protests and riots against the Netanyahu government. They weren't about security at that time. In 2012, I wrote about this in my book, Monopolized. There was these mass protests about the price of food, about the price of housing, about the tycoons who control many parts of Israel's economy. That ended up resolving in a number of reforms, including one that took prices for cell phones down 90% in Israel. In the last year, we've seen large and growing protests over the essential overthrow of the judiciary. Those have not yet been resolved. They're kind of on hold as we wait for this situation to resolve itself with its unity war cabinet. So Netanyahu already was on very thin ice, and the security issue was what overwhelmed those other very large-scale protests, very large-scale dissent inside Israel. And now that has bowled over. I have seen videos of cabinet members in Israel going into these border towns and essentially being thrown out, being told, get the hell out of here. We don't want anything to do with you. You've destroyed our lives. I don't see a way back. And then so internally, what does that mean for Meretz? What does that mean for the other governments, the other potential parties that could pick up the slack? In a country where they've had 4 elections, I think, in the last 4 years, all of them essentially deadlocked, where they were looking for more support on one side. This is what can tip that over. Now, I don't think that necessarily changes the security question. It doesn't change these fundamental issues that we look at from the outside.
Right.
But I think it changes other questions inside Israel and makes that government, potentially, not one that's going to overthrow the judiciary, for example.
Yeah, it is.
But what does that do for security? I don't know that it does anything. I mean, there is kind of broad support on this project, I think, to an extent that the next couple of weeks are going to. I
agree.
Out.
And we should say, we've done a couple of interviews over the past 6 to 8 months on the growing protest movement, and there was the sort of nascent hope that people would see that the authoritarian measures that have been practiced amongst the Palestinian population are being sort of domesticated on some level. I think the attack by Hamas sort of may squelch that sort of aspirational sort of development. But part of the problem too is that 20 years ago we could talk about an Israeli left, but I don't think that really exists to the extent that we don't have a left in this country, like a meaningful left, whatever constitutes the left or did in Israel, I don't know that there is one there. There may be a, like a potential for like a Nixon to China type of like somebody.
I'll give you an example. You may have heard these stories about this guy Yair Golan, who's the former senior military officer who is in his 60s, and he was called. Like, my son is in, I think, at the music festival. He was like, "Give me 15 minutes," and just went down and rescued the guy. He is on the left. He was a member of the Knesset for Meretz. And there is talk of, is this a moment for the Israeli left to actually move? They may not have numbers, but they might have the argument, and in Golan, they might have sort of a figurehead that might be right for the moment.